A lot of times, being on the defensive side costs you a lot of money. And actually, it turns out that there's a lot that you can do using open source stuff. Not everything has to be super expensive, and this is what Yaron will be telling us about. So, Yaron, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here. This is the second time I've been here at BSides on stage presenting, and welcome to my talk, Low-Hanging Blue Fruit, Hacking and Defending Yourself Using Open Source Tools. Now, I always forget to introduce myself, so luckily PowerShell allows us to invoke credentials. Here are mine. My name is Yaron King. I have 2 degrees in computer science, and for over a decade now I've been a defender at the Central Bank of Israel, and also as of last year have an honorable mention at the SANS Holiday Hackfest Challenge CTF, which I was very proud to get. And you can also find me on Twitter @Samurai. Now I have a question for you all. Which one of you here in the audience considers themselves hackers? Raise your hand. Come on. Okay, so most of you do not consider yourselves hackers. Remember that answer. Now, InfoSec conferences, they like to talk about the latest of attacks, the sexy hacking techniques. And this talk is not one of those talks. You can go now. What I'm going to talk about is actually give some tips and tricks about how to monitor, how to catch the low-hanging fruit, the really silly, simple stuff. And you know why? Because it's still there. And we need to raise the bar for the attackers. But I'd like to start with a story. In 2016, my boss, he got the authorization, the permission, the budget to send me on a pilgrimage. No, sorry, not to Mecca, but rather the Mecca of hackers. SANS course at Blackhat, later on DEF CON. Took me about 2 months of bureaucracy to get everything sorted out. By the time I was finished with the bureaucracy, I was done. But a week before my flight, I suddenly get an email from HR. They said that due to turbulence, political tension in the state of Turkey, all flights from the Bank of Israel to Europe and the US were canceled. 5 minutes later, I get an email from my boss. He says, "Did you see that letter from HR?" I said, "Yes." "What do you think?" he said. "I don't know, I'm pissed. It's 2.5 months of bureaucracy." "I think you should talk to HR," he said. So I decided to dismiss the elevator and just run 7 flights of steps up to HR. I barged into the door, totally breathless. And the woman there, she was on the phone. She gave me a weird look. I tried to explain myself. "Oh, it's kind of hard after you ran 7 flights of steps." And then she started giggling. She gave me another weird look, and she said, "Your boss is telling me to do silly stuff." It's at that point I realized I was being punked. Apparently, a team member, by the order of my boss, sent a spoofed email from HR, from that person, to me, saying that my flight was canceled. So a week later, I did fly to Blackhat, took a SANS course. Later on, it was at DEF CON. I had a blast. But whoever I got in a conversation with, I'd ask them I'd tell them what my boss did to me and ask for their advice. What would they have done in my place? I even got an answer from Chora Donna, the head technical assistant to the Mr. Robot series. He told me what he did to an inconsiderate worker in a former workplace. But none of the answers were good enough for me. I wanted to go on an entire big phishing targeted campaign against my boss. I love him to death, but he deserved some retaliation. The only problem is I had no idea how to do it. So I started researching SMTP headers, how to spoof emails, the from, the to, the recipient, all those different headers, how to spoof an email. Eventually, I managed to spoof an email from his boss to myself, to my mailbox. Something about the latest Gartner convention and insights from it. So that was good, but I needed a weapon. I need to weaponize that email. So I decided to go for Office, which is one of the best weapons there are. And apparently, one of the formats that you can save a Word document is a 2003 XML format. And in it, those macros are saved as a binary blob that's encoded as base 64. The tag, the XML tag for that is called editdata.mso, and even the beginning of that encoded binary blob, if you decode the base 64, the beginning it starts with active mime. So I encoded a malicious macro, sent it to myself, but our emailing filtering system blocked it. I was stuck. Then a while later, for some reason, God knows why, I decided to look at that binary code, at that base 64 encoded string, and re-encode it a second time, and sent it. First of all, the macro worked, the document opened, and second of all, when I sent it to myself, it bypassed the filtering system. So apparently, the filtering system was looking for the regular base 64, which decodes to active mime, but now it was looking at a different string and didn't recognize it. I even tried the same trick a few days ago, just to upload something to VirusTotal. I created a VBA reverse shell interpreter, the basic of basics, and did this thing, and the count dropped from like 50 to less than 14 different engines that actually recognize it. This simple trick. Next thing, I had to bypass the email sandbox. But bypassing a sandbox is not too hard if you realize what its weakness is, and that is human interaction. So instead of the regular auto-open macro, which runs just when you open the document, I changed it to a different macro, which runs when you scroll down to the next page, which I was sure that my boss would do. So I managed to get everything to my mailbox. Oh yes, everything was set to go. So it was a Thursday afternoon. I sent the email to my boss, and I was waiting for a reaction. When he comes to my office, he says, listen, this is Thursday afternoon. Nothing good will come out of this. Go home now. I know I am, because in Israel, we work Sunday to Thursday. Friday and Saturday is the weekend. And he was about to go home. But as he was trying to close his computer, he saw an email from his boss, something about the latest Gartner conventions and insights from it. And my boss, oh, he dislikes Gartner. So he had to open that email and see what his boss wanted. And it was an office document. So he looked at it. He even enabled content because some of the graphs there weren't drawn visually well enough. And of course, the document was boring, just regular stuff you'd find on Gartner and no insights whatsoever. So he closed the document. And then he saw this on his desktop. And a few seconds later, all the documents and pictures he had on his desktop changed to a .crypt. My boss's heart missed a few beats that minute. He called me up on my extension, says, hey, listen, are you in the office? I said, yes, you're calling me on my extension. Can you come to my room, please? So I walked in a straight poker face. Yes, what's going on? And yanked his chain for a few minutes before divulging that it was all me, and he didn't just unleash ransomware before the weekend on the entire organization. But that got me thinking about how I myself can possibly try and hack my organization to make it better, to go to the next stage of defending it. So here are a few tips and tricks I found along the way. The first one is overriding EDR products. Now, who's everyone's favorite cats? Some would say this dude. Others would say this guy. But this is a security conference, so we're probably all thinking the same thing, right? Benjamin Delpy's famous MiniCat's tool that allows us to dump user credentials from memory. Well, I was messing around with MiniCat, and I kept getting caught by the AV. So I tried various variants I found. Let's call one of the variants Mutts. So I was messing around with a Mutts sample, and I kept getting caught by the EDR product. But I wanted to bypass the EDR product. The only problem is, damn it, Jim, I'm a blue teamer, not a pen tester. I don't know how to evade such products, but I had a sneaking suspicion. Certain files were looked upon more favorably than others. Whitelisted files, let's say files with certificates from known vendors. So enter our tool of choice, SickThief. SickThief is a Python script that takes a file with a certificate in it and just rips the certificate apart and embeds it into a different file. So I took my Mutts sample and I took Process Explorer from sysinternals, which has a Microsoft certificate, and I just got a totes signed Mutts sample. I'm sure what you're thinking right now, and you're right, the certificate is totally invalid. It has nothing to do with the file it's embedded in. It's just there. But guess what? When I tried that trick, it completely bypassed the EDR product, and I was allowed to run MiniCats. So I told that to the EDR company. They were surprised. They asked for my totes signed Mutts sample. I gave it to them, and 2 weeks later, I got an updated version of the product. And now the same trick doesn't work anymore. So I have just raised the bar for the attackers. This next section, I like to call Don't Piss Exec in My Pool. Everybody's familiar with PSXK. It's a tool that's used by sysadmins and attackers alike who like to live off the land. It allows us to do remote commands on a remote host. And it does it by sending a file to the remote admin share, which is C Windows. And also it creates a service with the same name. And then through RPC, named pipes, you can send it commands to the remote host and also get the output from those commands. So that's on the red side. But how can you monitor the use of PSXK in your organization? Because it's okay if one of the sysadmins is using it, possibly. But if a secretary in HR is, something's fishy here. It's not too hard. Because you can look at the system event log in Windows, which is 7045. A service was installed on the system. Now, an attacker can change the name of the file. He also can change the name of the service that is being run. But there are two things that he probably can't change using PSXK. The fact that a file will be created in the admin root in C Windows, and the fact that it's going to be a service as well. So even if I have a totes legit PSXK, I can still find it. And according to my personal small experience, not too many services are run from the C Windows folder. So once you clear out some regular organizational noise, you get a pretty good noise, signal-to-noise ratio to catch some potential candidates for PSXK. Password spraying. Password spraying is something that we hear a lot in the news for the past year or two, and it sounds very elaborate, but it's actually a pretty simple technique. A lot of companies have fallen prey to it. Citrix would be one of them. But all you have to do really is take a list of users and the list of passwords, or just one password, and you enumerate all those users with that password or the list of passwords and see if everyone is using a weak password. So on the red side, if you want to try it out, there are many tools to do a password spray. My personal favorite is Bo Belloc, DefTech. He's from Black Hills Information Security, and his tool, Invoke Domain Password Spray. It's a PowerShell script, very easy to use. You just give it a single password, and it iterates over all the users in the organization for that password. Or you can give it a list of users and a list of passwords. Now don't worry, it's not going to lock any of the users because it's only going to try each password on each user no more than 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times. Depending on the code, you can always change that so it won't lock any of the users. Now, let's say an attacker has compromised the machine in your organization and is currently activating a password spray. How can you monitor and catch them in the act? That's not too hard as well, because we have the security log event ID 4625, an account failed to log on. Now, if you correlate those events into your SIEM product, and you try to catch, let's say, more than 10 of those events in less than a 5-minute period, or a 1-minute period, and it's not Monday in the rest of the world, or Sunday in Israel, where everybody's coming back from their vacation and holidays or weekend and can't remember their passwords, you might be dealing with a password spray. You can also log on different types. So you have the interactive type, which is number 2, or network, which is number 3, or RDP, which is number 10. Gives you more information. So this password spraying exercise got me thinking about my own sort of password organizational behavior in my organization. How many people were using weak passwords. I was curious and I wanted to find that out. Now, if you're a hacker, one of the holy grails that you're after is this file, ntds.dit. This is the database file which holds all the users' password hashes, and it's located on the DC, on the domain controller. But if you're a defender, you already have the keys to the kingdom. It's no problem. You can get to that DC. And there's even a built-in utility in Windows called NTDs Utility, which allows you to take a backup of that file, including with the system hive in the registry, the SAM, and you can copy it, let's say, to ctemp. Our next tool of choice is one of the in-packet library files. It's a Python script called secrets dump, and you give it that directory, and it outputs a file with all the names of the users and all their hashes of their passwords. The next thing I did was use a tool of choice. I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. It's called Excel spreadsheets. So I started taking those hashes and grouping them together to users, creating clusters. And most of the clusters were not clusters at all. They were a cluster of one, meaning one user with a unique password. Not necessarily strong, not necessarily weak, but unique. But then there were other clusters, bigger clusters that had 18 or 60 or 88 users all sharing the same password. Now listen closely, because this might be happening in your organization as we speak. I checked those users out, and you know what? All those users were applicative users, infrastructure users, not human users, users used by commercial products to access the domain, to access databases on behalf of the regular users. And that told me an entire story, because I realized that whenever the sysadmins were tasked with the task of creating a new user, they created a new user, and there's so many passwords they can remember in their minds, they just use the same password over and over again. And guess what? One of those users was a domain admin account. So if someone compromised that password, he just had a password of a domain admin. So I will not share password with my friends. So a solution would negate the need for the sysadmins to generate strong passwords and remember them. So it needs to be something, a machine, a computer, maybe a password vault of some kind, something that can generate strong passwords and save them for secure viewing later so that humans don't have to. A while later, I was looking at a pen test report done to us by an external pen testing company. And I was reading through the pages, and one of the pages was talking about weak users and a list of users that had a weak password. And that got me thinking. I was pretty curious, because how did the pen tester know how many people had weak passwords? Luckily, the report had a screenshot of a logo of a name of a tool. I looked it up. It was free. Now, due to EULA reasons, I can't divulge the name. But I wanted to know not just who has a weak password. I wanted to know how weak is weak. How many were using password or capital A, strong A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 exclamation mark. I knew the tool knew. It just didn't divulge that information. So I had to enhance the tool's capabilities. But damn it, Jim, I'm a blue team and not a reverse engineer. But I did know one thing. I knew that certain programs that are in .NET and CSharp, if they were compiled in debug mode, or compiled with all the symbols and the source code inside, it could be decompiled. So enter a tool of choice, IlSpy. IlSpy is a tool that allows you to do just that. If the file was compiled that way, you can just throw it into the tool, and it will output an entire C# project, which you can load into Visual Studio, which I did. It took me about 2 days to compile it and get the code running again, because IlSpy is not perfect. It had some over-references, and it lacked a few references, which I had to put. Eventually, I got the thing to run. But I realized that this tool is not so much a hacking tool, it's more of an assessment tool, because you have to run it with domain admin credentials on the actual domain controller. But apparently I couldn't debug the code live, dynamically, because the sysadmins, they don't like it when you try to install a Visual Studio IDE on their domain controller. So I had to go a different route and go for a code review. and a static analysis. So it took me some more time going over the various functions, trying to understand the workflow of the tool. But eventually, I got to the actual function, the actual class, and the actual function that took a weak password from a pre-configured password list, hashed it, and then compared it against all the hashes of the users on the domain controller. So all I had to do was add one line of code, not just true or false if the user had a weak password, but what the password actually was. So now the report came in with a list of users and all their list of weak passwords for any weak password found. And I have curated a password list from various sources and then refined it. So what I did was just take those passwords, let's say password, and then added password 1, password 2, password 10. So I could see not just who had a weak password, but who was running around with the same schema of the password. Something which just comparing hashes would not have told me. I have a lot more time than I thought, so I'm going to give out another story. One of the extremely weak passwords that I had found of one of the users was a user from IT. Someone who always claimed to be security aware, security conscious, and he always went into meetings talking about how we need security. He even took a CISO course to understand security better, and he had an extremely weak password. That I had to make him think of that password. He needed to change it. How could I sort of prankishly tell them that he needs to change his password? So in my organization, there's a Outlook web access internally, so I logged in as him. And there's an ability to change the icon of the picture of the profile to something else. So I changed it to, are you familiar with the statue, the Thinking Man? Well, there's a meme out there, it's probably a famous meme, of the Facepalm Man. And that's what I did. But apparently it was too white. He didn't even notice. So I waited a week, heard nothing. So I decided to schedule an appointment with my boss, the CISO, every day for a week, talking about password policies, with him being the organizer. Nothing happened. Because he was so busy with other projects, every time they got a pop-up of a meeting, he just canceled it. A week later, he talked to my boss and asked him, what was it about, I don't know, some meeting with you for this past week? And my boss was none the wiser, so he said, I don't know. So the guy just shrugged his shoulders and left. So I had to escalate. So I decided to go back to the profile picture. Apparently it wasn't colorful enough. So I decided to change it to a picture of Disney's Pumbaa from The Lion King. That's big, that's colorful. That got his attention. So he realized he was being hacked by someone from IT. The first thing he did, he changed his password. When I ran the report again, I couldn't find it anymore. The only problem is, which I didn't think of, is the fact that he still thought he was being hacked even a week later. Because apparently, some people who were communicating with him through email, when you get the profile picture of someone, it stays in your cache. So everybody kept on getting Pumbaa pictures of him every time they sent him an email, even though on the server that picture didn't exist anymore. So after that, they told me the truth. I have no idea who's hacking you. It's not me. I also found out that 25% of my users had popular passwords, shall we say. And out of that, 43% were human and 57% were applicative. And that's something that getting that visibility is an agent of change. Now we can do something about it, now that we know that the problem exists. So to conclude, when I started this talk, I asked you, which one of you out there consider themselves hackers? Most of you did not raise your hand. But the question is, what is a hacker? And it's a good question. And let me give you my personal interpretation of it. You see, being a hacker is not a skill set, it's a mindset. So if you have a curious nature, if you like to know how things work, if you question authority, if you want to know what lies in those gray areas between how a system is supposed to work and how a system actually works, then you might be much more of a hacker than you've previously thought of yourselves. Because today, I know I am. Thank you very much.